You guys like that Apple Card review I did yesterday? Yeah? No? All right, whatever. Today, we're actually going to do some analysis on Apple, and we're going to go over their event they just had with all the services they announced. You know, the Apple News Plus, the Apple TV channels, the Apple Card, of course, the Apple Arcade, Apple TV Plus. And we're going to do it with the help of Ben Thompson over at Stratechery, the best tech analyst in the game. And I'll link to this article so you guys can read it too. So the first thing that Ben mentions is that Apple announced a lot of stuff at that event, but they didn't really give much details about any of this stuff. For example, the lack of pricing information. We know that Apple News Plus is $9.99 and the Apple Card has no fees, but that's about it. So the question is, why did they have this presentation now? And of course, most likely it's to please Wall Street, please these investors. Because if you looked at Tim Cook, what he said in January, he revised Apple's guidance lower. January 2nd is when Tim Apple announced it, and the next day Apple dropped 10%. Rough day, but Timmy probably announced it at the right time. I mean, Apple was in a downtrend and that announcement was like the short-term bottom. It's been moving up since there. But one of the things that he said there is that we can't change macroeconomic conditions, but we're undertaking and accelerating other initiatives to improve our results. So these other initiatives are likely all these things that they just announced. See, Ben Thompson says it seems possible that announcing so many new services so far ahead of their launch was just an attempt to deliver on that promise ahead of the company's next earnings call. And that earnings call is coming up very soon, May 1st. You gotta work the investors a little bit, right? And by the way, I should mention that all of this about Apple with all the services, this is all part of their transition into more of a services company. Because as we've explained in our previous Apple videos, which if you haven't seen, I'll put a link to that playlist right here, iPhone sales have flattened out because the market is pretty much saturated. So for Apple to keep growing as a company, revenue-wise and profit-wise, they need to focus on pulling more revenue out of each one of their iPhone users. So they're shifting from hardware more to services. And again, we explained that in all those videos, so go check it out. And Ben reiterates that point again. The iPhone isn't going anywhere, it's still a cash cow, but it's no longer growing. So Apple has no choice but to look elsewhere. And there's three main ways that companies as big as Apple, with cash cows like iPhone already in hand, there's three ways they can achieve growth. First way is create new products. So this is the most obvious path because you know Apple, you associate amazing products with them, but it's also the most difficult. It's not easy to create a phenomenon like the iPhone over and over again. I mean, Apple has done it a few times, but it's still very, very difficult. And as Ben says, they're still doing pretty well with it. Apple Watch is a hit. AirPods are just everything right now. People love them and they love flexing with them. The HomePod though, you know, that didn't work out as well, but management is already moving on from that. You win some and you lose some, right? You got to keep releasing products to be able to get a hit. So that's the first way to grow, create new products. The second way is to extend the integration. So Apple is vertically integrated, and that means they're creating the hardware and the software, and it's all one company all the way through, which is different from like Google, who creates the Android operating system, but they don't create all the phones. There's lots of different companies with different phones that all use that Android operating system. Now, as Ben explains here, even Apple, they're not creating every part of the product. They have a lot of third-party suppliers that are supplying them with like the chips and everything that go into the phone. But the more you integrate that and bring those types of things in-house, the more revenue you could pull out of it yourself because you're not paying money off to these different companies. And every time you integrate services like this iCloud backup, Siri, Photo Stream, any of those services, as you make them exclusively Apple, that helps to differentiate the iPhones. So people end up wanting the iPhone not just because it's a great product, but also because it has all these exclusive features or services. So it's just more ways to differentiate your money-making product so that hopefully you can at least keep sales steady or even increase them, possibly, which is pretty difficult as we've explained with the iPhone right now. So that's kind of the idea with a lot of the services that Apple has announced. So previously credit cards, you know, everyone had a credit card from their own credit card company, but the new Apple Card is all about integrating that into the Apple ecosystem. So here's a little graphic here. You had credit cards and Apple Pay all going through the iPhone. Now you have Apple Pay, credit cards, and Apple Card. So the red is more of Apple taking that over, which means more revenues for them. Same thing with gaming with this Apple Arcade that's coming out. They're going to have another bundle, so people will just subscribe to Apple Arcade instead of buying individual games. More money for Apple. Apple News Plus, once again aggregating stuff. So you just pay for your subscription to Apple News Plus and you get everything else you used to get individually. So it's all bringing these services all together and under the Apple umbrella, which I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, it might be convenient for customers, but it also gives Apple, again, so much control over everything. And we already have that problem. We've got these big tech companies pretty much controlling the internet. You know, I talked about this before, like Google, Facebook controlling where traffic goes. And same thing here, like say you're a newspaper or magazine. Now you got a big problem if you're not in the Apple News Plus. Because if people are already paying a subscription here, why are they gonna go to your stuff? They might as well just use what's in that subscription that they're already paying. And it's a bundled deal, it's a good deal. So these guys are forced to either get with Apple News Plus or die out. And I mean, it's more complicated than that. And what's happened to the whole publishing industry is more complicated, but you get the idea. If Apple has so much power and now they're doing all the bundles and they want everyone going through their stuff, well, you either got to play up to Apple or you're screwed. So it's more of that closed internet, which I'm not a fan of. So that's the second way a huge company like Apple can grow, extend integration. And the third way is acquisitions, because they have all this cash, right? So any new company that's about to blow up, they can acquire it. So one of the things that Apple announced was Apple TV channels, which is not the same as Apple TV Plus. Apple TV channels is just like Amazon channels or Roku channels, where basically you're using Amazon, Roku, or Apple to get to the channel that you want. And the channel might be like HBO or Showtime. It's like a la carte shopping that you're doing through either your Prime account, Roku account, or Apple account. Apple didn't have that before, but now they're gonna have it. And what's really interesting about these channels that Amazon, Roku, that these guys have is that these are the real money makers, which is the same thing for Apple TV. So we'll get into the analysis of Apple TV Plus, but Ben says here that it's not the money maker, it'll probably be the TV channels that are the money maker. So basically what happens is when you buy a subscription through a certain platform, like say Amazon, to another channel like Showtime or HBO, Amazon is getting a cut of that money. It's like an affiliate program because they're driving that traffic to those subscriptions. And these are huge traffic drivers. Like according to Variety, Amazon channels account for 55% of all a la carte direct-to-consumer video subscriptions. So like 55% of all the subscriptions to all these different channels are coming through Amazon. So they're getting a nice chunk of money from that. And that money that they make from Amazon channels is actually what justifies their Amazon Prime Video. I mean, you've noticed, right? The TV that we're watching now, every show on every network is so high quality and looks so expensive to produce. Where do those costs go? Well, as we discussed in that HBO video, which if you haven't seen, I'll link to above, all these companies have different business models. So like Amazon Prime Video might actually be a loss leader, but Amazon is making money on it through different ways, through their Prime subscription, through these Amazon channels, through other services, through products they sell. But yeah, these shows are expensive. They take a bunch of money to produce. And a lot of these companies aren't actually making money on those shows themselves, which is what Ben talks about with the Apple TV Plus, because Apple is spending billions of dollars to create original content for that service. And what's interesting about Apple's strategy that it's only going to be available on certain devices. Like it'll be there on Amazon and Roku, but it will not be there on Android, Windows, or the web. So they're trying to make something like Apple TV Plus, which is all their original content, exclusive to iPhones, right? Because they want more people to get into the Apple ecosystem. But they're also making it available on certain other devices because you need some scale to be able to afford making that content in the first place. See, as Ben says, the economically optimal approach is to make your content from Apple TV Plus available as widely as possible. That way you increase the leverage on the fixed costs of making the show. Like you want more subscriptions, right? You want more people watching the same content. You want more and more people watching that one show that you produce. And this is, as Ben goes on to explain, why like Apple and Netflix aren't direct competitors. You can't be. Netflix is too big. And again, these are all the different business models that we explained in that HBO video if you want to watch it. So that leverage he was talking about, he has a little example here. So assume Netflix has 200 subscribers who pay $10 each, where Apple, because you know they're restricted to just iPhones and certain devices, they only have 50 subscribers who pay $10 each. So Netflix's break-even point for a show is $2,000, the 200 people times the $10. So sure, Apple could outbid Netflix for the show and pay $2,001, but that's a loss of over $1,500 based on their economics. So like the question for Apple's strategy is, can they stomach years and years of losses? Because that's who they're going up against, right? Netflix, to buy the best shows, to buy the best actors, directors, all that stuff. Can they afford all those losses? And then for the short term, can they afford to ignore billions of Android and Windows devices? Because there's users that they're basically saying, no, you can't get Apple TV Plus because you don't have an iPhone. Again, that closed internet thing that makes me mad, but it's their strategy, I guess. So as Ben goes on to explain, the strategy of competing against Netflix doesn't make sense. The way that Apple TV Plus does make sense is not as a new product with a new business model, but rather as another extension of Apple's integration. So this is a way to sell new iPhones and also Apple's TV app. app. And once someone has the Apple TV app, they're going to collect money every time that person buys a new Apple TV channel. So if you get that OTT box set, that little black Apple box, and you go and buy HBO, Apple gets some of that money, right? We explained that. So the whole Apple TV Plus thing may not be a moneymaker. They might actually lose money on it. But the point is that they're a services company now, right? So they need more services like that Apple TV. And they will get some revenue from it, obviously, with all these services. And hopefully that revenue will become bigger and bigger as they grow bigger. But for Apple, they're still very dependent on products, physical products in the physical world. And these services are just working to differentiate those products. So again, you need an iPhone. If you want Apple TV Plus, come buy it. And that's where Apple will hopefully make their money, with the long-term strategy of services completely taking over. But now it's like a hybrid. And it's the same thing with all these other services, like we just mentioned, Apple Card, Apple Arcade, Apple News Plus. It's all about providing the services, pulling the most revenue out of these customers, and enticing new customers to come into the Apple ecosystem. So that's Apple's strategy. That's why they made those announcements. That's why they're doing all this stuff. Now, as far as would I buy the stock right now? I mean, honestly, it's not on my radar because it doesn't fit into my system, which I've told you guys before is the Nasdaq All-Stars momentum system, which is fully systematic. Like, I'm not discretionary anymore. And if you want to learn more about that system that I use, I'll link to a video right here that goes into how it works and why it's successful and why I love it so much more than discretionary trading. But anyway, if I was just analyzing Apple, it looks like it's fighting with its 200-day moving average. So if I was looking for an entry, I would want to see a significant close above this blue line. And really, I guess we'll see what happens here. Like, it could just go sideways and fight around with this blue line until its next earnings report. And that could actually be an inflection point. Like, if investors really like what they heard here, then you might see price really launch from here, and that might be a good entry point. And you got a nice little risk area right here where you could set your stop. How you do it, it's up to you. And as you know, the process of how you do that is way more important than picking Apple in the first place, right? The trade management is most important. So before you get into any stock, make sure you have that plan. Now, if you like this video, make sure you subscribe and hit that bell so you get email notifications when our future videos come out. We're going to keep covering Apple. It's super interesting, great business model. So we're going to keep you abreast of it. And we publish videos every single day on all stock market and business topics. So subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Stay fallible out there. Bye.